Jessica Crow. I am the founder of Apogee and the host of Change Leader Insights. And I'm so excited because today I have with me Shoshanna French. She is the founder of Simple Spirit. She's an intuition expert, a coach, a speaker, and a consultant for leaders who make million and billion dollar decisions. And today we are going to talk about all things leadership and change and intuition. But before we get to that, Shoshanna, would you tell us a little bit more about yourself? I know my bio was brief for you, but would love to hear, like, how did you get to where you are today, coaching and inspiring leaders to leverage their intuition to be more effective in their roles?
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm really excited to be in this conversation with you today and to just share more about the power of intuition always, especially in leadership. Originally, I started a business in 2005. I was in like a money group and she said, everyone's going to start a business. And we talked a bit about what I could offer. And I think probably as a lot of entrepreneurs are, I have a lot of different things I'm interested in. But this one in particular, I actually started as a psychic. So I did, readings. And what I noticed, I did that for a few years, and who was attracted to having conversations with me were really smart people who, in my thinking, they would say things like, I've never done this before. You came highly recommended. And they were really practical people who sat down with a psychic to like get help and decision making. And eventually what I realized is these really smart people were making kind of some silly decisions. And almost in all the conversations I would have with them afterwards, they would say, I kind of knew not to do this, but my board, my spouse, my friend group, my community, this book I read, this group I was in, all gave me different advice. And then I was confused which I should listen to. And so then I just didn't listen to myself, and I made this decision and there was a mistake, and I need to figure out how to fix it.
Right.
So that kind of prompted me to go, who actually could really use training and intuition are these leaders who, in one decision, they impact a lot of people. And almost all of them were visionary kind of purpose-driven, growth-focused, people-oriented kind of leaders. They care, right? They did want to win, but they wanted to win for the right reasons and in the right way. And when they won, it was like, it helped a lot of people. And so that's kind of what got me from just like meeting people at a Starbucks and doing readings with them with cards to, leading, doing one-on-one coaching, leading workshops for large, really like good sized groups, 40 people, but smaller organizations. And, as every entrepreneur you'll ever talk to, I pivoted about 25,000 times in 19 years. But the current iteration of my business and how I ended up here is I just kept asking, it's that ikigai, which is like the Japanese concept of purpose, right? From Okinawa. And so I just kept asking, like, what's the thing I love? What do people need? And then what is it that I could do with it? And the thing that I am uniquely suited for is I translate things that seem really complicated. I make them simple. And people make intuition really complex, and it's really not complex at all. And so I just simplified that, but then I also created kind of a practical way to engage with it and then learn how to apply it to really everything. But for these leaders, how to apply it to, bringing something to market, how to apply it when you go from a team of 5 to 40, what to do when you are bringing in a new C-suite level leader that's coming from a different organization. How do you get them to fit within your culture? Using intuition for all kinds of decisions that leaders need to make.
I love that so much. And I can imagine that you're very busy because there's a big need for leaders to tap into their intuition more frequently than not to paint a broad paintbrush, but this is something that I even struggle with. How do I trust my gut, my intuition versus the numbers or the data or the opinions of other people, because you're trying to balance all of those things. So having that trust internally is so important. One of the things when you and I first met that really struck me as kind of being an important thing to think about when it comes to intuition, you had mentioned that your intuition may not always make sense in the moment, or that it's not super clear. And so tell me a little bit more about that thread of thinking, right? When you're working with leaders, you're helping them develop intuition so they can make better decisions. How do you coach them through that process of discerning what is my intuition actually telling me?
Yeah. Well, what I would say is first things first, how I define intuition is a direct way of knowing or understanding something
Mhm.
without prior experience. So you can
Mm,
just even hear in the definition that it sometimes is nonlinear. So
yeah.
let's say that you're a CEO of an organization, you're sitting at a meeting and you have this thought, like just the thought about, actually what we should like, oh, it'd be really good is we need to change the logo for this thing. And you're like, logo for what thing? What logo? And you're listening to the meeting and we're not talking about a logo. We're not talking about a launch, but the thought in your brain is about a launch of something. And you're like, I don't totally understand where this is coming from. So
Yeah.
what I train leaders, excuse me, what I train leaders to do is to not relate to intuition like this, divining moment of download, but instead recognize it like almost as a creative faculty that you have, right? It's a
Cool.
capacity for connecting to something that is beyond what is known, what's right in front of you. So I teach tools. So rather than this thing that you're like, I don't know what this is telling me about, you don't ignore it. Instead, you ask some questions. So
Right.
I teach them how to engage with it. It's a little bit like I said this once to a leader. Do you know if like you had a toddler who came in who was like a 3 or 4 year old who was covered in mud and they were outside and you were like, where did the mud come from? Outside. Yes, I get that. Where? In a puddle. Okay. What puddle? Oh, and then by the time you're done, you figure out that the 4 year old has taken the hose, filled up like a hole in the dirt in your yard, and they were jumping in and out of it. You're like, oh, context. They're
Right.
covered in mud because they created a hole in the garden with the garden hose.
Right.
Got it. Okay. Intuition is the same. If you can correlate it to what exactly it's communicating about, then it does
Uh-huh.
make sense. But if you
Got
don't
it.
know what to connect it to, then it is a little bit like, what just happened? How is that related to anything that's happening right now in the moment? And so, with most leaders, especially like the visionary kind of leaders that I tend to, work with or talk to, they're thinking about like 100 different things at once. And how our intuition works is it's activated by our curiosity. So if
Mm,
you're trying to wonder about something, innovate something, sort something out that no matter how you look at it logically, you can't quite figure it out, like, interpersonal conflicts in your team.
mm.
And you're like, why is this happening? When I put the team together, they all seem like such a good fit. And now there's this thing going on. Intuition can give you insight into what you can't see using your logic.
Wow.
And I just want to
Yeah.
caution leaders that I am not a throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of person. You're not getting rid of your logic in place of then using your intuition. You just learn how to become an intuitive decision maker. So you
Yeah.
apply intuition in the places where, in that decision process, where having access to insight, clarity, or innovation, something outside of what you already know, that would be useful or helpful. And in the places where you need to fix something or you need to figure something out with data that you have, use your logic. But the
Mm.
idea is to use both and to use them in the appropriate place.
That's helpful. Thank you for clarifying. That makes a lot of sense. Do you find, when you're coaching leaders, how to leverage these tools, what sort of, I'll just, kind of throw out there, like, is there resistance? Do they push back on kind of what you're teaching them? Do they not trust themselves to trust their intuition and use curiosity? Do you see any of that with the clients that you work with, or are they
I
like,
would
I'm all
say
in?
no, I mean, all resistance. We all have resistance. So, of course,
Yeah.
resistance at some point comes up, whether it's in the beginning because I'm asking them to do something in a totally new way that goes almost like counterproductive to what if these are highly successful leaders, part of what I'm asking them to do is to regularly pause before they
Yeah.
make a decision. And that
Yeah.
for some is like, boop, they really get, that's where the resistance shows up. And then for some, where the resistance shows up is when they take this newfound connection to their inner knowing or their inner feeling or their ability to see something or hear something, when they take it then to their teams, that's where their
Mhm.
resistance shows up, because they can't figure out how to translate what is
Yeah.
coming to other people who may not have the benefit of, knowing about intuitive decision making. So of course resistance totally comes up. How I work with resistance is the same way that I work with resistance in myself, which is
Yeah.
you have to build new neural pathways. So if I'm
Yeah.
asking you to make decisions in a new way, you're building a new way to make decisions. So I don't ask
Yeah.
people to change how they make decisions at first. If you're a list maker, like a pro and con, make your pro and con list. And then at
Mhm.
that moment, apply the tool I taught you to pause, to ask questions, and then to listen to see what your intuition has to say about it versus
Mhm.
only relying on the old way. If you're the kind of person who picks up the phone to call a colleague or a trusted advisor, before you pick which one of those to call, pause, ask
Mhm.
questions, and listen to see who to call. Who would be the best person to advise you in this moment? So it works inside of how you already make decisions, but now you're just kind of adding a different element.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. Now, how would you, so you're coaching the leader, they're benefiting from this new way of thinking and approaching how they move forward as a leader. You mentioned that there might be resistance from the team who don't have the benefit of working with you directly. So how can we sort of scale what you're describing to a team that the leader is asking to do something differently that they aren't quite able to articulate because they are using their intuition as well as their logic? How do you kind of bridge the gap there?
Well, it all depends on the team size, where the leader fits sort of in the organization. If they're,
Mm-hmm.
if they're a director versus if they're a C-suite level, it just all
Mm-hmm.
depends. So, quite often what happens is I'll work with a leader and then they'll start the translation process and it's not going well. And I'll come in and I'll lead a workshop about communication and mindfulness. So
Ah,
we insert not intuition necessarily, like I may talk about it, but I really insert this conversation for mindfulness, which is what does it take to be present in the moment? Because in those experiences where we make really rash decisions, we're
mm-hmm.
either going by what we already know, which may or may not fit the culture of the organization. This may be about more innovation, creativity, and solving big problems in a new way, or it might be reactive, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I keep getting, like, for example, one team I worked with, there was a woman on the team with the big kind of genius visionary CEO. And this one woman just experienced getting thrown under the bus a lot. So when the CEO would come to the team with new ideas, she was like, not going to do it. Nope.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing the plan we created, because when we go off the plan, it goes off the rails and then someone gets blamed and it's me. And the only way that came up was during, the communication, the authentic communication for powerful leadership, the workshop I lead. So I led the workshop. She got to say that. And then the leader was, oh, okay, now, like, I got it. That makes sense. So she was
Yeah.
able to talk to everyone kind of at the same time and get everybody on the same page. Now, there are organizations where I work with the leader where I don't get brought in for, for this kind of workshop. And in those instances, mostly what I have them start to talk about is what I would call wellness. So
Yeah.
what's the wellness of the team, right? How are they feeling about the mission of the organization? What do they see as their part in the fulfilling of it? And how are you building collaboration versus how are you controlling outcome? And usually
Yeah.
that conversation, it helps quite a bit with translation, but it's not a one and done kind of thing. So it's definitely not for anyone learning to use, any leader who's wanting to use their intuition. It's not as though we have a single conversation, or you go into a meditation, let's say, or you read some really good book and you're like, oh, now it's not like the Matrix where, like, plug them in and he's like, I know Kung Fu. It is not like that. It's like repetitive, over and over again, application, habit, practice, mechanics. And that goes, I think every leader already knows that. It's not like you be a
Yeah.
good leader once and you're like, I'm
Like
done,
I did it.
I've
Yeah.
arrived.
Well, so this makes a lot of sense. How can you, one of the things that comes up in organizations frequently is conflict, and conflict, you mentioned the scenario with the leader who got burned a lot. And so you created space for conversation that may have otherwise potentially been a conflict or just never brought up. But when it comes to making decisions and change and all of these things, there's going to be differences of opinions. How can we leverage our intuition in those moments with conflict?
Well, I think the intuition part comes second. I think what comes first is changing the way we think about conflict.
Got it. Okay.
I think a lot of people view conflict as a problem. Now, that in and of itself isn't wrong, but if you think about how we relate to problems, we're trying to fix them.
Right.
Which in some organizations, to me, I've identified kind of the three ways that I've noticed that leaders show up when conflict is a problem. They show up as an avoider. So they change the subject and go, do we need to address this? Like, it seems like this is an aside. We really just need to focus on what's important. That's an avoiding. And what happens when you have a leader who's avoiding the conflict, people feel really kind of ignored, and the conflict doesn't get resolved. It actually just starts to fester, and it can become pretty big, and people lead teams and like that. I think some people try to be smoothers, which is like, can't we all just get along? And they try to do what I call translation between people, but really what they're trying to do is just like make it sound like we all agree, even though we don't. And then the last is you have the confronters. They're the ones that are like, we're not finishing this meeting until we address this. And all of those things are in the interest of fixing a conflict. Like, you want it to go away. And then I think that when you shift your relationship to conflict, and instead of it being something to be fixed, it's actually just an opportunity, because conflict is a totally natural part of relationship. Like, I read this book recently called Go Wild, and it talked about the evolutionary biology that our brains are really designed for two things. One, collaboration and togetherness. We have mirror neurons in our brain that allow us to literally mirror the empathy and understanding we have with other people. That's collaboration, right? But our brains are also wired for aggression and competition. So what can happen in conflict is that if someone believes differently than us, how our brain relates to them is like a different species. And then when they start saying different stuff than how we think, it is very threatening. And it becomes like how you would be if you saw a bear when you're on your hike. Oh my God, you freak out. And then there's no resolving of conflict in that. So if you know that about our brains, and you know that the way you relate to conflict is that it's a problem and not good, then your natural way of responding to it is what's going to show up. So I tend to believe that if you relate to conflict in a very, I don't love conflict. It's not fun, right? But if you relate to conflict like it's natural and normal, and the intention is to resolve it because it's an opportunity to actually create collaboration, be restored to that collaboration and connection versus aggression, competition. If you take it from there, then intuition, how intuition can play is from there, you can really, to use a more woo word, like you can tap into what really is at cause right now. As a leader, you can be like, what is actually at the source of what's happening? Not it's a problem, you have to fix it, but like there's something going on that is at the source of this miscommunication. What is creating aggression and this competition between people? And is it something related to what I'm doing as a leader, or is it actually something that's way beyond who I am as a leader, and it's something interpersonally, and what I can do is show up in my leadership and make a difference? And so I really think people who are naturally avoiders, they can be champions. So they do better. They're not good at holding space for a huge group in conflict, but they can really support one person, right? They can support maybe their direct report who has direct reports, and say, what do you think is the source of the conflict? How can I support you, right? People who are the smoothers, they can become bridge builders, because we're naturally, I'm a bridge builder. We're naturally able to kind of like see all the sides. And if it's not a problem, but instead opportunity, we can create conversation. And then confronters, they can actually become truth tellers. The primary difference there is if you are truth telling instead of confronting, then your intention is to say, from my perspective, what I see is going on is this. I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but I think if we don't actually address it, it's going to create bigger problems. And that truth telling is no less hard for people to hear, but confronting leaves people with wanting to run because confronters are a bit intense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to me, that's like the moment when intuition can be applied, is once you shift your relationship to conflict. That's what I've seen in organizations. And I am not a conflict expert. I know some great coaches and consultants who are, but it is definitely something that I have seen a lot in smaller organizations, which is really more my specialty, is working in groups of 40 or smaller to really learn how people can show up in their leadership, but in conflict.
Yeah. Oh, that's so helpful. One thing that you said too that stood out to me was related to being heard. I don't feel like where does listening, like actively listening, come into play with all of this, whether it's to others or to ourselves? Tell me a little bit about, I don't know, your thoughts or philosophies on the value.
You're asking all the deep questions. That's such a deep question, Jessica. That's such a good and thoughtful question. Makes me want to ask you what your philosophy about listening is. That's such a good question.
That's my
Well,
one.
so I am, I wouldn't say I'm a student of Brene Brown because I've never taken one of her courses, and I have friends that have, but I love her work. And specifically about the importance of like creating safe space for vulnerability, and how vulnerability begats vulnerability, and the redefinition of vulnerability, which is not what I've always thought, which is like open to attack.
Right.
But instead, authenticity, openness, the whole idea of true belonging that she defines in her book, Braving the Wilderness. But what I'll say is that my general philosophy about listening to yourself is that within ourselves is a wisdom. And to me, wisdom is like this combination of experience, what your experience has been, what you've learned, like books, other people, whatever, and then this other thing that we're talking about, intuition. And the combination of all those things together is our wisdom. And we have access to all of it at any moment. However, any mindfulness teacher will tell you that how our brains and bodies respond in high levels of stress is not from the part of our brain that can do that critical deep thinking, but instead emotional centers and the reptilian part of our brain, which is reactive. And so to me, any smart leader are doing practices for whatever you want. Like there's so many different words for it, right? But like mindfulness, or taking time for themselves, or self-care, or going inward, or reflective time. I've heard lots of different leaders talk about it in different ways, but if you're not doing that, if you're not taking the opportunity to go within on a daily basis, it means that you get lost to the noise. So you either get lost to the external noise. I mean, we are inundated with information, like inundated, especially if you're a leader, because then you're doing what everybody else does, which is you're looking at social and you're reading emails and maybe watching the news and like, blah, blah, blah. And then also you have other people on teams and in your company, and all of that noise. So that inner kind of space of quiet and being able to, and for some of us, like for me, I have to exercise first. Like I have to move my body, because if I don't do that, then I don't burn out the extra energy I have.
Going.
Yes.
Yep, monkey mind.
I wake up with an active brain.
Yeah. I believe that. Yeah. I mean, actually, so I taught yoga. I still teach yoga, but part of the purpose of yoga is to prepare our minds for meditation. They call that the monkey mind. I think it's like Chitta Vritta. I don't remember the Sanskrit, but
Chaturanga is that posture, right? The monkey posture. Chaturanga, is that what that
Chaturanga is when you do that. Yeah, it's down, high to low plank, and then you're
okay.
Yeah, up dog. That's a part of it.
That's right. Okay.
I mean, in the vinyasa style that I teach, but I think that's an important thing to call out too, is that our ability to find the space or make time for that sometimes we need a little precursor of exercise or something to help prepare us for that quiet stillness. And I'm like you, I usually, when I meditate, it's easier for me to meditate after I've done something physical as well. So all of this is just a wealth of knowledge that you have dropped on listeners and viewers of this podcast. And you are an asset to any organization that reaches out and works with you, because what you're sharing is so important for leaders and teams to not only hear, but embody. And wow, how amazing would it be if more companies had that, like they were really nurturing that concept of developing and trusting and building intuition and using that to navigate our interpersonal relationships and make decisions. It'd be pretty powerful. So I wish you just tremendous success, because it's going to send ripples through the culture and organizations and impact people's lives in such a positive way. Is there anything that you would like to kind of tie this conversation, like put a bow on it? Any final words of wisdom that you would love to put out into the universe? Hopefully people hear it. Anything you'd like to share?
Kind of like 3 key points. One, you already have intuition. You're probably already using it and just don't know. So it's not about learning how to use your intuition, but it's a pathway of remembering. So tap in. You're already tapping in. Just learn how to recognize it. And that, if you go to my website, simplespirit.com, I have a test. It will kind of tell you how. It's a little quiz, tells you how your intuition works. Second point, if you are a leader and you find that you sometimes feel like you have to know everything and it feels scary to admit when you don't, I invite you to practice something which is a Zen Buddhist practice called beginner's mind. And it's I have a very, very hard time with this. So it is a practice that I do on a daily basis, which is I move myself to a space of curiosity, and ask myself this question: what if I didn't know? Like, what if I didn't know? Not like I don't know, but what if I didn't know? That is helpful. And then the last is exactly what you said, which is, whether it's yoga, for me, it's intense, like high intensity workouts, but whatever the thing is that allows you to quiet your brain. I have clients that cook or make art or walk their dogs or whatever the thing is.
Right.
If you don't currently have a practice for quieting the mind and opening the heart, which is what happens naturally when we get in that quieter space, adopt one. Try a bunch of different ones out. Like if we're always students and always teachers as leaders, like what's the opportunity for you to go into that quiet space so that you really can quiet the mind, open the heart? Because the last question you asked me about listening, that's the last piece, which is how you listen to others is from a space of curiosity.
Yeah. Brilliant. Oh my goodness. And I think you mentioned where people can find you, but one more time, what is your website? What's the best place to get in touch?
Best place, simplespirit.com. You can also find me on all major social media.
Perfect.
Whether you find me on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook. Super easy to find me.
Wonderful.
Shoshanna French. I am the only one.
Which that's impressive. I think there's like 1,000 Jessica Crows. I actually interviewed a Jessica Crow earlier this year. She's fantastic.
You did?
Yeah, it was a hoot. But thank you so much for being on the show. I'm so grateful for your time and for you sharing your wisdom. And I have no doubt that listeners and viewers are going to feel the same way. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.